Good morning. It is Tuesday, October 13th, 2020. You can now relax and be informed. Here is your daily bite of news. President Trump has tested negative for the coronavirus on consecutive days, according to White House physician Dr. Sean Conley. In response to your inquiry regarding the president's most recent COVID-19 tests, I can share with you that he has tested negative using the Abbott Bionex Now antigen card, Conley wrote in a memo. He continued, repeatedly negative antigen tests taken in context with additional clinical and laboratory data, including viral load, subgeneric RNA, and PCR style threshold measurements, as well as an ongoing assessment of viral cultural data, all indicate a lack of detectable viral replication. This comprehensive data, in concert with the CDC's guidelines for removal of transmission-based precautions, have informed our medical team's assessment that the president is not infectious to others, Conley said. Texas restrictions allowing only a single drop box for mail-in ballots in each county was reinstated by a federal appeals court that said the governor's concerns about ballot security outweigh voting rights, outweigh activists' worries that millions of voters won't be able to safely access the drop box. The federal appeals court in New Orleans late Monday sided with Republican Governor Greg Abbott. The three-judge appellate panel, all appointed by President Donald Trump, accepted Abbott's claim that multiple drop boxes created opportunities for voter fraud, although the state presented no evidence such fraud actually exists. The judges said no proof of actual voter fraud was necessary to justify the state's protective measures. The judges said voters who don't want to be inconvenienced by driving further or waiting in long lines to hand deliver their ballots could simply drop them in the mail or vote in person instead. Johnson & Johnson said its COVID-19 vaccine study was temporarily halted after a clinical trial participant experienced an unexplained illness. The participant's illness is being evaluated. We are committed to providing transparent updates throughout the clinical development process of our vaccine candidate, Johnson & Johnson said. Adverse events, illnesses, accidents, even those that are serious, are an expected part of any clinical study, especially large studies. While there are hundreds of COVID-19 vaccines being developed around the world, Johnson & Johnson is among a small group of vaccine makers which have progressed into final stage human studies. The company is dosing up to 60,000 volunteers in the first big trial. Besides the U.S., it's also recruiting trial participants in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, and South Africa. AstraZeneca, Pfizer Incorporated, and Moderna Incorporated are among other Western developers with late-stage clinical trials. Pfizer has said it could have the data to support an application as soon as this month. Moderna doesn't expect to have such data until late November. The New York Police Department is preparing for protests in the city as the presidential election nears and contentious Supreme Court hearings begin for Judge Amy Coney Barrett. The department will require most cops to report for duty in uniform and should be prepared for deployment starting October 25th. This November 3rd will be one of the most highly contested presidential elections in the modern era. There is also a strong likelihood that the winner of the presidential election may not be decided for several weeks, the police memo stated. Accordingly, we should anticipate and prepare for protests growing in size, frequency, and intensity leading up to the election and likely into the year 2021, it added. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is being mulled as an attorney general within a potential Joe Biden administration. He had served under the Clinton administration as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development from 1997 to 2001. An attorney general within a Biden administration would be under political pressure to go after former Trump administration officials and manage nationwide unrest over police violence, among other pressing issues. Aides at the National Governors Association, which Cuomo chairs, have begun looking for contingencies to replace him, prompting speculation of his role within a Biden administration. Biden is considering him potentially for the role based on their decades-long friendship. Cuomo's national profile has risen for his handling of the coronavirus pandemic in New York, but he has faced some criticism over his mandate in late March that coronavirus patients be sent to nursing homes from hospitals. Protesters in Portland, Oregon pulled down statues of Abraham Lincoln and Theodore Roosevelt on Sunday evening and vandalized some businesses. The protest occurred the evening of an Indigenous Peoples Day of Rage, the day before the federally recognized Columbus Day. Sunday's gathering included about 200 people. Portland Police Chief Chuck Lavelle said the group put chains around a statue of Teddy Roosevelt and pulled it down using a vehicle. The crowd then toppled an Abraham Lincoln statue. Many in the group were dressed entirely in black with masks, body armor, and helmets and were carrying shields. 3 arrests had been made so far, and the driver involved in pulling down the statues. In addition to being pulled down, the Lincoln statue had Dakota 38 sprayed with paint on its base. That's a reference to 38 Dakota natives hanged in Minnesota, the largest mass execution in the U.S., which Lincoln ordered. The hangings took place after the Dakota War of 1862, also known as the Sioux Uprising. Roosevelt's statue had "Stolen Lands" painted across it. He has drawn criticism for his forced removal of indigenous persons, which he used to make his conservation efforts possible. Lavelle said protesters broke several windows of the Historical Society Pavilion, tossing at least 3 lit flares inside. The flares extinguished themselves and did not do any serious damage. There were no serious injuries or deaths. Lavelle expressed frustration at the 5-month mark of destructive crowd activity in the city. These events late at night, they purport to have a racial justice nexus, Lavelle said, but they're not that. They're about violence and criminal destruction. They're really hurting our community, and we deserve better. Facebook is banning posts that deny or distort the Holocaust and will start directing people to authoritative sources if they search for information about the Nazi genocide. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg announced the new policy Monday, the latest attempt by the company to take action against conspiracy theories and misinformation ahead of the U.S. presidential election, 3 weeks away. Facebook said Monday that the new policy is supported by the well-documented rise in anti-Semitism globally and the alarming level of ignorance about the Holocaust, especially among young people. Surveys have shown some younger Americans believe the Holocaust was a myth or has been exaggerated. The Anti-Defamation League has reported that incidents of white supremacist propaganda distributed across the U.S. jumped by more than 120% between 2018 and last year. Tech companies began promising to take a firmer stand against the accounts used to promote hate and violence after the 2017 rally in Charlottesville, where a self-described white supremacist drove into a crowd of counter-protesters. Zuckerberg said in a blog post Monday that he believes the new policy strikes the right balance between drawing the lines between what is and isn't acceptable speech. Zuckerberg, who is Jewish himself, clarified that while he personally found Holocaust denial deeply offensive, he believes that the best way to fight offensive bad speech is with good speech. Milgram and Wilson, both professors at Stanford University, received the Nobel Prize for Economics for 2020 for their work in auction theory. The professors used their insights to design new auction formats for goods and services that are difficult to sell in a traditional way, such as radio frequencies, the Royal Swedish Academy of Science said in a statement. Their discoveries have benefited sellers, buyers, and taxpayers around the world. Carlo Acutis, who was just 15 when he died of leukemia in 2006, is on his way to becoming the first millennial to be recognized as a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. Hundreds of mass devotees, including Carlo's parents and siblings, gathered in Assisi on Saturday for his beatification ceremony. Many watched on screens that were spread throughout the town's piazzas as a church official read a letter from Pope Francis that declared Carlo blessed. Carlo was inquisitive about Catholicism from a young age, inspiring his mother, who was not a practicing Catholic at the time, to return to the faith. He attended daily Mass for the first time since he was 7, never missing a day. When he was 9, Carlo began studying computer science textbooks and taught himself computer programming and graphic design. In the months before his death, he created a website that cataloged miracles. The diocese dug into his emails and computer search history and interviewed witnesses. People from all over the world had told about medical miracles, including cures for infertility and cancer, that happened after they prayed for Carlo. In February, Pope Francis attributed the unexplainable healing of a boy with a malformed pancreas to Carlo after the child came in contact with one of his shirts. Now that he has been beatified, Carlo could become a saint if a second verified miracle is attributed to him and is recognized by the Pope. If that happens, Carlo would be joining an elite group among more than 10,000 saints recognized by the Roman Catholic Church, just 120 of them who died as children or teenagers. The Israeli government on Monday approved an airlift of 2,000 Ethiopians of Jewish descent to Israel in the coming months, prompting angry reactions from Ethiopian Israeli activists who insist that about 8,000 of them should be resettled. Israel permits Jews around the world to settle there under its law of return, but does not grant that right to people known as Falash Mura, descendants of Ethiopian Jews who converted to Christianity about a century ago, many of them under duress. Since the 1970s, tens of thousands have been admitted from Ethiopia, where they faced persecution. Israelis of Ethiopian descent, who number about 150,000, say they often face discrimination, though, and excessive use of force by the Israeli police. Many of them have had trouble integrating into Israeli society, and the rates of poverty and unemployment are high. Though many of the descendants of converts to Christianity are observant Jews, the Israeli government does not consider them to be fully Jewish. They require special permission to migrate to Israel, and upon arriving in the country must undergo a conversion process, even if they already practice Judaism. In November 2015, Israel approved a plan to bring the remaining Falash Mura, about 10,000 people, to its territory by the end of 2020. But a few months after the decision, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said it would not follow through on the plan due to budget constraints. The plan approved on Monday would admit about 1/4 of the roughly 8,000 who remain, living in mostly rundown communities in the Ethiopian cities of Addis Ababa and the capital, Gondar. Some have been trying to relocate to Israel for 20 years. Ms. Tamano Shata, the Minister of Immigration and Absorption, who spearheaded the plan to bring the Ethiopians, called the government decision very exciting, but she acknowledged that she was sympathetic to the criticism against it. I think we need to bring everyone here as soon as possible, but unfortunately we only received a budget for 2,000 people this time, she said. The government had allocated $109,320,000 to bring the 2,000 Ethiopians to Israel and assist them in their absorption into Israeli society. The minister said she planned to present the government a plan to relocate another 7,000 Ethiopians to Israel in 2021 and 2022, and the rest in 2023. On Monday, Tanzanian residents, students, and firefighters were battling to contain a major fire that broke out Sunday on Mount Kilimanjaro, Africa's highest mountain. The blaze was burning on the lower part of the mountain. Hard winds on Sunday helped fan the fire, but the winds had since died down. So far, there are no injuries or deaths that have been reported and no property damage. The fire is still going on, and firefighters from TANAPA, other government institutions, and locals are continuing with efforts to contain it, said Pascal Chaliute, a Tanampa National Forest official, said in an update on the fire. Beijing has stepped up its intimidation of Taiwan by releasing a video on state media of a simulated attack on the island and by airing the purported confession of a Taiwanese businessman detained in China on spying charges. Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen appeared to offer an olive branch to China amid growing tensions across the Taiwan Strait, urging the Chinese Communist Party to engage in a meaningful dialogue on an equal basis. Her overtures were immediately rebuffed by Beijing, who had refused to negotiate with Ms. Tsai's administration since she was first elected in 2016. Hours after her speech, Chinese state media broadcasters ran a 2-minute, 30-second video of a drill off China's southeastern coast that showed in detail how the People's Liberation Army would deploy its military might to bomb and invade the Taiwan island of 24 million people. State media added to the psychological pressure on Sunday by showing an alleged confession by Meng-chu, a Taiwanese man who went missing after crossing from Hong Kong into Shenzhen in August 2019. Mr. Li was accused of taking pictures of Chinese military police who had gathered in a stadium for exercises with armored vehicles at the height of Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests. Taiwan accused Beijing of malicious political sensationalism and of deliberately manipulating Mr. Li's case, and criticized the Chinese authorities for interfering in Taiwan's democracy. Human rights organizations have regularly accused China, a country with an opaque judicial system, of forcing detainees to deliver public confessions broadcast on television. Well, that's quite enough for today. If you would like to read up on these topics, we invite you to see our sources in the description below. Subscribe to receive a daily news update. Thank you so much for listening. Be relaxed, be informed, be connected.